Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Ed Dixon Gallery. This afternoon, we're having an artist talk with artist Paul Rienzo. He's exhibited at the gallery many times before, and currently has 8 artworks in Suite B1 in the gallery. And but he's gonna, I'm gonna ask him a few questions, and he's gonna tell you a lot about his art and his practice. So. Um, Paul, if you just want to introduce yourself.
I'm an artist from Cincinnati. I I'm a photorealist, um, working in acrylic, and I've been active since the '80s. I did take a long break, but I've been back at it for the last 6 years, and just since I retired, I've been going more full at it,
Yeah.
as you could say.
Okay, well, that really is partly my first question is kind of going to be a two-part question then, because what got you into art in the first place, I guess, back in the 80s, but what then also got you back into art more recently, 6 years ago?
Well, go way, way back. So I always had the talent for drawing. I guess I used to draw a lot of cars and stuff. And then, like in middle school, I won a few awards at the school for, the sketches that I would do. Then I sort of lost interest for a long time. Um, until my mom brought home a painted wooden spoon from our neighbor, and I thought I could do better.
Mm.
And so I painted my own wooden spoon. This was like when I was in high school. And then when I went to college, like I started doing more drawing, pen and ink primarily. Um, really because chemical engineering is very boring
Mm.
and I just needed an outlet.
So no art classes.
No art classes.
Right.
No, other than like a 7-3 art class. I took a logo design class of like a extra credit thing in college, but nothing else besides that. And my minor in chemical engineering, but with a minor in art history.
Mm.
Um, so but that no formal training. And then after college, I gradually moved from pen inks into acrylics, and then when I moved to Cincinnati, I continued painting, and I joined a group called the Ohio Realist Group, um, which was or a group of artists that were trying to find places to show realistic art.
Mm.
It's very hard to in the late '80s to find any place to show it.
Okay.
Um, and eventually, I became the director of that group, and we were all across Ohio. It was like about 50 of us at at the P. Um, and then I started getting busier and busier with Procter and Gamble. That's who I was working with, and I just kind of and to that point, I got a show in Soho,
Mhm.
and I'd gotten a, feature in Watercolor Magazine, which is part of American Artist. Acrylic is technically a water media, so,
Mm.
they put it in there. And then, I just got busy, a lot of things went on. I was losing a little bit of interest
Mm.
anyway too.
Mm.
So, I really didn't paint, uh, till after I retired, and then not like 4 or 5 years after I retired. Um, and COVID had hit. And I had, we'd gone to the Macy's Day Parade in New York in 2019, and that year, the weather was very windy, so all the balloons flew about 6 feet off the ground, which made some really interesting photos out of that, and I was so inspired, I started painting them. Um, and, then COVID hit, and for plenty of time,
Mm.
and so I really got back into it then. Um Now, prior to that, all the work, almost all the work I had done prior was figurative and crowd scenes,
Mm.
and I show a few crowd scenes
Mm.
here. Um, but what I'm finding in today's world is everyone's on their phone, so nothing is particularly interesting to paint crowd scenes. Um, and so I started doing still lifes. I'd done a few still lifes in the past, not like 2 or 3, and I started doing more still lifes and trying to look for a big idea to unify what I was doing. And that's really where I am today.
Mm.
So that was 6 years on where I got back into it.
Okay. And that was going to be one of my questions too. And you, someone answered it, but between crowd scenes and still life, like which was your kind of favorite out of the two? But it sounds like this, yeah, the still life kind of took over.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things and I learned this, discovered this in my proctor years, is uh, everyone says they want a big idea.
Mm,
No one can really tell you what it is,
mm,
but they know what it does, but they couldn't tell you what it is. And in architecture, a big idea is when the architect is designing a building, there's a big idea that he has that not only inspires what he's going to do, but also creates boundaries about what he will and won't.
mm,
And so what I'm looking for is what I was looking for was a big idea. I was working with was when the figurative work. So I would go to Venice Beach once a year with my camera, usually on Labor Day, and just take pictures and then come back and look from those. So it's kind of anthropological sort of
mm.
approach. Um, and then later on, the still life, I started doing a couple still lifes. And like so, I was searching for okay, what is the unifying thought here? And for me, it was I would call it nature morte, which is uh, or from nature morte, which is what they used to call still life. The Dutch used to call it in the 16th century or 15th century. And so I moved from those idea of, well, I'll do mythological. So I always call it Mythos Morte. And then a friend of mine in Columbus said, you should just call it controlled myth.
Mm,
And so that kind of my unifying thought
mm.
around most of the still lifes. But then this one's actually from a different series. That's the bucket paintings. And the bucket paintings are like, the bucket's a good metaphor for me because we throw things away in a bucket. Buckets are also like how you group things together and classify. Um, it's also like when you have a huge quantity of stuff to throw in the bucket. So for me, that's another area that I've been playing with off and on. But honestly, the untold myths, I have lists and lists of ideas that I could do. The buckets, I have like less than 10 so far ideas that I can do.
Okay. So, and you're doing all these still life paintings, but I think sometimes when people see them, because there's a lot of exotic, I guess, um, objects, things from all over the world,
Yeah.
and people may not look at it and necessarily think that these are real objects, but the things you're painting are things that you have,
Yeah.
yeah, physically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That I've actually had in my possession.
Mhm.
I part of like with when we use for me in the Untold Myth series, I want to paint an object just once. And so I will either when I'm done, if it's a low value object, I'll donate it. I have a little case at Antique Mall that I will put stuff in as well. But I try to only paint it one time.
Mhm.
But yeah, for the most part, everything that you see is actually something I actually
Right.
had in my possession.
Because you have like the buckets of Barbies and the heroes and villains, but just tell us about a couple of things that are more exotic or from different countries, and how those came
Right,
about.
right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I I search I search for well, one, I will read books on mythology and take notes of any ideas that come up.
Mm.
And I keep a little not on your diary, it's on a computer, but I keep a running list of different ideas. So that's one aspect I do. Another thing that I do is I go just search on eBay
Mhm.
for things or Etsy. Or I'll just go to an antique mall, I'll go to Home Goods, I'll go any number of places to find different objects that are of interest. And if they spark something like, oh, it's not just decorative, there's something there, then I'll get it.
Yeah.
And I might immediately have an idea that I want to use, or it'll sit in my attic, but think of what I want to with it. Uh, Many times, so like the um, the screaming and elephants. I'd collected several different elephant things that seemed interesting to me. Um, I had seen online this Dank Knox sculpture of two screaming heads. And there's other examples of it, of like this single screaming head or whatever. But I just thought it was just really cool and said a lot in and of itself. Um, uh, and then from there, I started getting this idea of screaming elephants, but then I wanted to build it out. So I went to a thrift store and found a teacup that I liked and smashed it. Um, Went to the grocery store. Sometimes I have to wait till things that are seeding, either flowers or fruits. But I've got some raspberries because I wanted the screaming heads to be uh, so loud that they broke the teacup. And raspberries are anyway, so it's kind of the goes with that for me. And then when I was taking the picture, different pictures, there was one of the shots that I took. There was a slight breeze outside, and the wind blew a tassel hanging from the elephant to the side, so it looked like the screaming men blew it. And then I had driven by a underpass near the house, and it had a wild trumpeter vine, those orange flowers. So I just went back when I wasn't busy and I cut it down and brought it home and used that. It was flowers. A lot of the flowers I use in Spain actually grow at home too. Um, or just pick in the wild or whatever. But I guess that's how things can come together. Mm. Now with this one was a little bit different. The ends of the earth, as I had a bucket cleaning idea. I said, we'll put a whole bunch of earth in there. And then, so I started finding some different earths, and then that started to give me a little. I want to show this more of a commentary, um, just the way the earth is getting used up, and uh, so I found balloons that I wanted to be deflated, and I found that I had a heck of a time finding a galvanized bucket that I would see. That's a fact. When I was a kid, we had a bucket like that we threw the ashes in from the pot-bellied stove. So for me, that's an ash bucket. Um, and There was a earth ornament. I actually did not set the ornament on fire. I used ChatGPT to add the flames to that particular object. Because I've also started doing that more recently as a tool. I use ChatGPT to modify photographic imaging the way I want. I use a lot of Photoshop to optimize whatever image I'm going to work on. So
Okay. Of course, that was going to be one of my questions too. Is um, of course, everybody's using AI for everything, but um, how much did you use AI in your work? And you pretty much answered that, but uh, I mean, do you see Do you see it having any more uses in your?
yeah, I might sort. So what one thing I'm starting to play. I haven't started the new work, and this is only the second piece that. Normally I use a lot of Photoshop. Um, and they will go on the process. So I take the photos and then I will take them into Photoshop. I usually take 20, 30 photos. And sometimes I have to go back and reshoot it if I don't feel like I really captured what I wanted. But I'll take and I'll pick the ones that I want to use, or the main one that I want to use, and I will modify. I might make something bigger. I might make something smaller. I might modify the color of one of the objects. Um, but basically, Photoshop has been my sketchbook. And I literally do not draw anymore. I used to draw a lot. It would take me as much time to draw something and then destroy it when I start the painting, as it would actually to finish the painting. Um, so what I do with the photograph, once I have it exactly the way I want it, I use Photoshop again to blow it up to the size I want. 30 by 40 is a good size for me. Just to find if I work too small, I can't really get the detail I want. If I get too big, I can get lost in it. And so what I will do is blow it up to its like print it out in little pieces, tape it together, use carbon paper to transfer it onto a adjustable board, and then I paint from that. So I've eliminated drawing altogether, which allows me to do more paint. Um, for me, it's about any by any means necessary. And so I'm always trying new things, trying new glazes, trying new approaches to get the effects that I want. And as far as AI, so I've been just using touch here. Sometimes I did one. The other one I liked the photograph composition. I didn't like the colors of like the lighting. And so I just asked Chat GPT to uh, make the lighting more dramatic. And so I did that. Oh, that works now. Now taking it further, I'm actually playing around with creating objects that don't exist that should exist.
Mhm.
So one thing as in I have two different series that are related in my mind, and I'm not gonna really call them a series. They're more like a multi-part of the same uh, piece of art. Smaller works. Um, one is I'm calling wedge boat.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you're familiar with Wedgwood pottery, very Jasperware. Uh, it's very classical. We often took things from Greek revival and Rome and so forth. But I said, well, what if we were to take things from uh, the Mayans or uh, like the New Guinea, uh, African, all sorts of things. What would those look like? So I've been using AI to try to craft some different ideas around what I could paint as wedge bolt things that were never created, but should. I've been doing the same thing with tin banks, turning things into banks,
Mm.
playing around with different expressions, it has a lot to do with money.
Mm.
Um, and so I'm playing around with like a money pit bank and a I've got another one that I'm playing with around um, your money, your life, down to two different things. One's your money, one's your life. So this is playing different things with that. So I see those as in the future another area that I would go to.
Yeah, I was wondering where you're going with that, with things that don't exist that should, but now I get
Yeah,
it now.
yeah.
Okay, makes sense. So another thing I've always kind of wondered. So, you're doing all the work I've seen, and it's been so realistic. And I mean, you kind of touched on it earlier, but is has that really been your sole focus where you're working with things with, light and shadow and making sure that, it has the realistic depth and all those kind of things?
Yeah, for me, so part of what I talk about like a big idea. So for me, it's also a big idea to use to leverage your strength. So I'm very good at rendering realistic over things. So it might not work as a big idea for someone else, but for me, it leverages my strength. Um, and the other thing that I find too is, particularly for all of these, if you create a believable illusion of realism for folks, that's another way. There's nothing communicate better than something that's real, um, versus something that's abstract. You have to really work to understand. So I want my stuff. Um, I use realism in that way. Uh, and people also come as like, boy, there's just so much in there to understand. And yeah, that's what I'm kind of aiming for. And you mentioned something about some of the exotic things that I use. I find that sometimes you can be too exotic,
Mm.
that people like they don't understand what that object is, so it loses something. So I've got to be I really tend to want to like exotic stuff.
Mm.
But in hindsight, I've seen a couple of pieces that have been too exotic now to like this. It's not here. There was one I did where I had this really cool Japanese cast iron incense burner, and in it I put the lacquered wood bowls uh, that are kind of are nondescript to some extent. People see the whole thing, and then the center is the arrangement of wood burls, which basically they're knots of wood with the bark still on them, and people are like, I don't know what that is. So there's something to be careful of that.
Right. Yeah, but and it's a bit of a history lesson though to look at some of these paintings, to go through all the pieces that are in them and look at where they're originally from,
Yeah.
made, and different things. So it's definitely a lot of information there. Um, and what I wanted to do is check and see if anybody in the audience has any questions that they might want to ask about any particular piece or anything else that we talked about today.
The screaming at elephants. Uh, could you talk a little bit more about what the inspiration was around that? And it feels very uh, grotesque in a lot of ways, and then there's so much beauty around it. So could you talk a little bit more about screaming at elephants?
Yes. And one of the things in that painting, I tried to do all of them. I think a lot of work artists will try to shock,
Mhm.
and I want to invite you in. I don't want to. I'm not after shock value. And then I think there's kind of a epidemic too of artwork trying to be clever, and I don't really want to do that. I want to tell a story, and or at least create something that you can put your own story to it. And so that's one of the approaches that I take as I'm creating things. I want to be more evocative and provocative. Um, I want to be very approachable with the work and having stuff in there that you look at and you had your own associations with. And if you do, that's going to allow you to create your own story. I'm looking for I have in mind what the story is to me, but that might be something different for someone else. Probably be in the same ballpark, but I really do want people to say, that I looked a lot at used to look in when I was younger, I was a fan just all psychology because it talked about how the mind will put stuff together. And so I really try to create all my work so that it evokes meaning, and you look for meaning when you see it. It's just not meant to be just a pretty picture. Now that piece in particular, the screaming elephants, was uh, finding some random objects, and then it just came to me around. Oh, there's something interesting of this screaming an elephant as an idea. Um, it's kind of there's some. It sounds like it might be a fable to the title, like it's almost like an African fable around. It's just like you're screaming an elephant. And that would be the moral of the story that you're not going to get anywhere just screaming at the elephants. You could scream as loud as you want, and they're not going to pay any attention. Um, and then it also resonated with me around because this is in 2024 around the presidential election and so forth, and it just seemed like you're just screaming at elephants here. They're not listening. Um, so that's a little background on what that is. And then I just started putting the other things together to try to add more layers to it, the raspberries and the broken teacup. Um, some of that stuff, like I said, I had acquired some of the elephants, and I had, uh, as it was tell I had for 30 years. So like the big elephant in the back, but that's a plant stand. So
If you look at the elephants, that like some of them are children's, so I think that one's the children's toy that kind of looks like a bicycle and something like it. So it's a really interesting combination of the elephants that you put together there.
yeah, I try to get for this for the day. This is a little bit unusual for me too, because normally I find one object um without repeating it. But this one I decided I kind of want to make it a group of elephants. But I find what I try to be too is I look for when I talk about the untold myths, there's themes across global mythology that run across. You keep seeing strings of themes. And you see them in different cultures, so you're repeating. And so those repeating themes are the things I'm trying to bring to life. And so I will use objects from multiple cultures. Now, the original meaning might not be the same as how I'm using it, but I still want to get that global feel of that everything is coming together in one thing. Um, I've read it a little bit of Joseph Campbell, who's he had a PBS series years and years ago. No one's ever seen it at this point, but um, one of the things that he was noted for was the idea of the hero's journey, and he noticed that in all of the in a lot of stories, there's the hero who goes on a journey, who has a mentor, that has to overcome these different obstacles, and so forth and so on. So you can look at uh, uh, The Lord of the Rings. You can look at Tommy Boy, and there's both as the hero's journey. And Star Wars, there was famously um, George Lucas either talked to Joseph Campbell or read the book, one of the books, and it helped shape what Star Wars, the the storytelling of Star Wars, and we can see how much that has resonated um, through the years. And it totally Yoda is the mentor before him, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker is the hero, and they gotta destroy the Dark Star and Darth Vader.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's so
Death Star.
Death Star, that's what it was. But yeah, so that's a really good example of how these stories and themes kind of travel. Um, and then like in Christianity, resurrection and Christ rising, that is resurrection is like all over the place, over and over again. Tree of life is in all kinds of different cultures. Uh, so that's one of the things that I'm playing with these recurrent themes. I'm using global objects that are kind of laden with meaning and symbolism. Um, that just call the viewer to interpret it and understand it.
You answered my question. I was gonna ask about Joseph Campbell,
Oh,
but I really like when you start your composition of your still life, do you start with one object or do you have an idea that you
yeah,
go
yeah.
in?
I, s- I have I already have an idea in the assemblage of objects
Mhm.
um, of what I want to do, and it's interesting. So the piece that's in the Dayton member show
Yeah.
right now called Poison Fruit.
Yeah.
I had in mind this idea of a snake, which is snakes are all over mythology, but they're very hard to use in art that's not going to be like just turn you on or shock or so. But I did have this idea of uh, a pomegranate, kind of like a fruit, and a snake, so a poison fruit, and then I had that those two things in mind, and I shot my original. It was that had to be pretty dark, and I had shot my original piece I was going to do was just a pomegranate sitting on there's an unusual glass cup that is sitting, and I had shot with that and the snake coming out, and I had a couple of interesting bookends in the back, and it's just I was excited about the idea, but then there was something missing in what I was aiming for, which I'd be pretty clever as aiming for, but wasn't quite there. You know when you see it. Um, and so 6 months later, I went back with I had bought a silver snake instead of a wooden snake that's coming out of it now. I got myself a couple of pomegranates instead of one. And I had seen this interesting thing on Instagram about heading prints which had interesting scarves. These one had hands all over the place. There's no way to think of the witch in Sleeping Beauty is handing the apple over with the hand comes to mind. That's all one hand's in there. And then I found this thing at the thrift store, the finial that it's either an avocado or pine cone, depending on your point of view. But I thought it was really cool. And then as I was photographing it, um, I usually have two different light sources when I photograph. And it was throwing the sink was throwing a shadow on the avocado. I said, "Ooh, that's cool. That's cool. I hadn't thought about that before. I want to really make sure that's incorporated." So I made it more pronounced. But that's kind of how that evolved. I start many times I will reshoot a photograph with the exact same objects and just light them differently. Or maybe I'll pull some objects out because it's gotten too complicated. So
Right, and just viewing your work, you can tell Mike's very important.
one of the things that so for me, what I find is that I want the light and the reflections, that's light too, but need to tie it in the shadows, tie everything
Mhm.
together into a single piece. Um, I have found the hard way that if I don't have pronounced lighting, even though we're like uh lighting like sunset type lighting or morning glow or with harsh shadows, um, then it doesn't really bring the piece doesn't come to life. That becomes really there's one in there called Murder Most Foul, which has a very pronounced dramatic lighting in it. Um, the and I had shot that before with kind of not much. There was daylight, but there was no harsh light, and it just didn't resonate as well. But then when I reshot it with the purpose of I want to create dramatic lighting in this, and the glass red vase that I used was actually reflecting onto the wall, which is cool. And then I had used this red stretch vinyl as a tablecloth that also was reflecting really cool. Um, and so for me, that helps bring everything together into one cohesive piece. And I think at least probably not for a long time is AI going to be able to get to those complex lighting situations that you can only get by just taking either painting some light or working from a photograph that is over the actual objects.
And you mentioned Murder Most Foul. That probably my favorite in this group. So just I'll just ask one question about it, like which object of you got the wine bottle and the different things in there, which object came first in that
Um,
idea? Or did you have the idea and you found the objects, or you had the object and then it sparked that idea?
yeah, it's kind of so yeah, so that evolved in an interesting way. I had I'm trying to think when I did the first generation of that, the photographing it that didn't work out. I had uh I had the toy gun,
Mm.
which I just thought was really interesting. It was very the anguish was on its face. So I wanted to use that. Um, and then I I had an association like with Caesar and Kennedy because there was a obviously like the assassination thing. Although that's Augustus Caesar and not Julius Caesar. So who's going to say? Um, then because some of this stuff just needs to be approximate.
Mm.
Um, and then I had ordered a Pagliacci print from the opera. Is this something that again it kind of loosely connected to it to the idea because Pagliacci was this uh, happy clown that killed his wife, and so that was the murder in there. And then I had in mind also what actually strung stuff together for me was Bon Jovi's "Murder Most Foul." song. It's just like 20 minutes long or something. And so those kind of came together that way. And then I said, well, I should have I should have something else in there to kind of bring it full. So I went out and found a bottle of wine with Lincoln face on it, and I used that joke. And so that's kind of how I kind of pulled it together. So that it's kind of they kind of come together organically and not necessarily the same way every time. Um, it really starts with a set of objects that I want to play with, and then I might add up to that and play around with different parts of it.
All right. Well, I think we can probably stop there. If anybody else has any questions, I'm sure Paul won't mind answering questions off camera here. So, but we'll wrap it up for today. So, thanks for coming and doing this talk today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And for the show.